We have a colossal problem right now by our failing to understand that if you look at all of humanity, the future is in so many ways Africa. We have 1 out of every 4 people on the planet Earth, and by 2050 are going to be on the continent. 1 out of every 3 working age people. The continent is indispensable when it comes to the future strength, opportunities, prosperity, health of Americans. It is stunning to me that we are lacking a vision for engagement with the continent and are making such colossal mistakes. What the Trump administration is doing right now is not only unacceptable, but it is a series of self-inflicted wounds when we cut the kind of programs that have created economic stability and opportunity for American companies, that have gutted public health and our response to public health, because a public health crisis anywhere now is a threat to public health everywhere. We are stopping, especially as we see the Tanzania elections and the Uganda elections and the instabilities there, we're cutting back our resources, helping with democratic stability at a time that democracies are under retreat all across the globe, and the democratic freedoms and ideals that we preach are being undermined by forces that don't share our values. We are in a state of crisis right now when it comes to our relations with the continent and other competitors of ours, from Iranians to Russians to Chinese to people that don't always align with us, from the Emiratis and others, are flooding the zone where we are retreating in a stunning way.
Mr. Baserbi, as we've been discussing, I believe the Chinese Communist Party presents the most significant long-term strategic threat to the United States. I also believe that China is a global threat that has to be confronted globally, including in Africa. We have a vast range of interests in Africa and a complicated security architecture. Our interests there are counterterrorism, trade in critical mineral supply lines, global biosecurity, preventing illegal immigration that threatens allies in other parts of the world, blocking illicit finance of hostile actors, and even, importantly, space development. And across Africa, again and again, the Chinese have exploited local political, economic, and sometimes even cultural conditions to undermine American national security interests. Sometimes they do it by securing bilateral and multilateral agreements that block American goals. Other times they do it by creating instability, but they are actively doing it. Talk a little bit about the specific tactics that China is using in East Africa and the Horn, and what are the specific conditions they are exploiting?
Hello, what's up, my good people, brothers and sisters, and ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the channel. We are back again with another hot topic. Of course, this is a part 2 of a video we did recently on the panic that has stricken the government of the United States of America, that has sent them back to the boardrooms to discuss, rediscuss, reevaluate their stance, their position, and their influence in Africa, which of course has been seriously and quickly diminishing. Of course, juxtapose that with the very fast growing influence of China and the likes of Russia in the continent of Africa. I want to throw you back to 2018 when President Donald Trump called African countries shithole countries. But right now, they have panicked, and they are discussing about us secretly without us on how to, endear themselves back to Africa. The narrative has always been the same. Dehumanize, prejudice Africa publicly, but in private, engage them strategically. That is what they're trying to do. So despite such talks like those of Donald Trump, behind closed doors, Africa is treated very differently and very seriously by the US policymakers, the think tanks, US corporations, and military strategists. The continent is seen as vital for global prosperity, and of course it is. So without wasting so much of your time, let's go right into this video. Let's listen to what they are saying about us, discussing about us in our absence, and we'll be right back with a good analysis as usual. And just before I go, let me welcome all of those new members to the family. Welcome to this channel. Please subscribe to this channel and be part of the family. So see you at the other side of this.
Thanks to the witnesses for your helpful testimony. I want to return to the chairman's opening comments where he introduced an article into the record and talked about the recent discussion of the Kenyan president in China about this new world order. Let me read from an article that I'd like introduced in the record. Kenya calls for a new world order that reflects global South realities, and this is from KBC Digital, the Kenya Broadcasting Company, if I could introduce it into the record. From April 23, just recently. Speaking during a public lecture at Peking University in Beijing, President William Ruto emphasized the need to fashion a new world order which takes cognizance of present realities. The president, who is in China for a state visit, okay, China is welcoming the Kenyan president for a state visit, said this: the ongoing trade tariff wars could signal the end of the old world order as it has existed since the end of World War II. And further, regarding the relationship between Kenya, China, and the rest of the world, Ruto remarked that Kenya and China are not just trade partners, but, quote, co-architects of a new world order. So his comments are putting the U.S. in the old world order that has not helped the global South. This is what he is asserting, whether or not it's true, how true it is. He's suggesting that the trade wars might be the destruction of the old world order and the creation of a new world order where China and Kenya and other nations focus more attention on the global South. How do we get to a place where the president of Kenya, where we've had this long relationship just 2 weeks ago, is making those assertions in the middle of a state visit to China? I do think comments that have been made by my colleagues, the recent apparent abandonment of PEPFAR, the defunding of USAID, NED, the DFC, the MCC, the YALI program, which also has a presence at the University of Virginia. AFRICOM is not based in Africa and has perennially been under-resourced. It's based in Germany. Picking a fight with South Africa, a pretty important nation, and labeling them as committing genocide against African farmers, accepting Afrikaner refugees while we're shutting off other refugees from Africa. Mr. Survey, you used to work with Church World Service. Church World Service work on refugee issues has been dramatically curtailed. The church I go to is heavily Congolese refugees who have been resettled in Richmond by Catholic Refugee Service. Their work has been curtailed. You know, we don't get the benefit of the doubt necessarily, and people look at evidence and they interpret it as to what it means. And what they're interpreting, the evidence that I've cited and other bits of evidence, is that the U.S. is, you know, to put it charitably, uninterested, and to put it not so charitably, affirmatively disinterested. And that leads a president like President Ruto to make those kinds of comments, almost gleefully hoping that Donald Trump's tariff war will destroy the world order that the U.S. created in the aftermath of World War II to the benefit not only of the United States, but other nations all over the world. We've got to reverse this. We have to reverse it. And I hear this all over Latin America as I travel there. We'd rather deal with you than with China. I think in the Americas, there's even a closer cultural connection because of migration patterns and family ties, but there are with Africa as well. We'd rather deal with you than China, but you got to have something on the table. And China does, and they're not going anywhere. And yeah, the conditions may be bad, and yeah, there are strings attached, and yeah, they may not perform, but they got something on the table. What do you have on the table? The things we've had on the table are being hollowed out. And, you know, we can wring our hands about this all we want in this committee, but if we keep wringing out the architecture of the relationships with Africa or other parts of the world, China's got stuff on the table. They're going to continue to. I don't know so much about Russia or Iran. Their staying power. China's going to have staying power. I wanted to ask you, Ambassador Gavin, one question, and you were getting to it sort of at the end of the Q&A with Senator Cornyn. I thought it was intriguing in your comments, your opening comments about, hey, let's look at East Africa in connection with Yemen. You know, we divide CENTCOM from AFRICOM. We divide in this committee, you know, Africa from the MENA region. Talk a little bit about what a coordinated Red Sea strategy might look like.
Sure. Well, I think that it would require convening both the African side of the Red Sea and the powers there with these Gulf actors who are clearly intervening to try and stake out influence and territory, and trying to tease out what exactly are the core security concerns that these actors are worried about, and what is a more opportunistic approach. And, you know, ultimately, these two regions are going to need to build an institutional security architecture, and we can assist with that. But our own thinking about U.S. security in the Red Sea, in the Bab el-Mandeb, and the Gulf of Aden, we need to be thinking much more holistically and bringing the expertise from our different communities to bear. And I do really recommend USIP's work on this. They've been doing incredibly important work on this issue for a long time.
Yield back. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. There's nothing to yield back, Senator. I guess you're right. I'll be delighted to.
I'll yield some back next time.
I'll put that on the record for next time. Senator McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. Thank you both for being here today. Mr. Meserve, I understand you're a Pennsylvanian, so it's good to have you here today. I want to start with just a word on PEPFAR. So I've been a long supporter of the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which was created when I served during the Bush administration. By some estimates, that program has saved 26 million lives in just over 20 years. So my question to you is really twofold. Number one, how does that program advance U.S. national security interest? And second, some countries in Africa have started to move to their own versions of that program. What is the path to self-reliance and self-sufficiency for that program?
Yeah, thank you, Senator, and greetings from your home state. I'll take the last one first. So one of the problems that we had with PEPFAR, even though it was tremendously successful, and was that some host governments were not taking the ownership that they needed to. It was never supposed to be an open-ended program. And so I think that I hope that elements of this are reconstituted. I genuinely do. Public health interventions have been successful on their own merits. If it is reconstituted, I think there needs to be a very clear roadmap for receiving countries to take ownership. It needs to be thoughtful and reasonable, of course, but one of the dangers of long-running aid programs is that eventually they just become an entitlement that countries just receive as a matter of fact and don't take ownership for. So that would be one thing. Regarding, and then I think probably with some countries, you need to do an assessment of, do they all need PEPFAR anymore? Which ones really need it? Which ones are at greatest risk? I lived in Zambia at the height of the HIV pandemic, and that was it was a focus country for very good reason. So, you know, we need to continue those types of assessments. And then how does PEPFAR help national security interests? Well, one, it does contribute to soft power. It's very hard to quantify, and I think we weren't good enough about getting as much soft power as we should have from PEPFAR, but I think it's also undeniable that it did help us in that respect. But also, mass death in a society is fundamentally destabilizing, yeah. and it prevented mass death in some cases, and it allowed for a much higher quality of life for millions of people, even beyond the lives it saved. So
stabilizing, yeah. Thank you. And I just want to reiterate, as someone who's a big supporter of the program, the initial vision at creation was never that it was perpetual. There was a transition to self-sufficiency. So thank you for that. And Ambassador, thank you for being here. You know, we read and hear a lot about the Belt and Road Initiative and growing influence of China in Africa and expanding security assistance. What challenge do those activities pose to U.S. counterterrorism efforts? And in particular, what would you suggest the United States be doing to ensure that in light of that investment on the part of the Chinese, that we're evolving our counterterrorism efforts to be as effective as possible?
Well, thank you. I think the Belt and Road investments, I mean, certainly some of the digital Belt and Road investments raise questions, make it difficult for us to engage in intelligence cooperation with some of these partners because of concerns about Chinese access. But some of the infrastructure investments, quite frankly, redound to our benefit too, right? We are driving on the same road that they built, and that can help us get some things done. So I just want to flag that China's not going to leave Africa, not ever. And so learning how to compete effectively will require recognition that African governments are not going to reject all Chinese investment in trade. It's their largest trading partner, et cetera. But on counterterrorism, I think that it's really about influence, trust, the kind of relationships with security establishments that enable meaningful cooperation in any security space. And China's working very hard on establishing those kinds of relationships. Again, I think that the U.S. potentially has an advantage if we can work more institutionally rather than personally because of churn and turnover.
To the chairman's point, yeah. Mr. Chairman, I yield as well.
I'll take it. Thank you so much. I have on this side, in order of appearance, Senator Rosen, Senator Van Hollen, Senator Booker. I know it seems like you were here, but they actually were here before you left and came back. So under the rules, sorry about that. Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Chairman Risch, Ranking Member Shaheen. Thank you to the witnesses for your work and for your willingness to serve. I'm going to talk a little bit about Somalia first, and a lot of extremist problems there, because over the past year, ISIS Somalia has emerged as a key player in the Islamic State global financial and operational network. It's facilitating the movement of money, foreign fighters, and military trainers to Islamic State affiliates throughout Africa and beyond. ISIS Somalia just doesn't pose a threat to U.S. forces and our partners in the region. Their aggressive efforts to plan and conduct external operations are a threat to U.S. citizens everywhere. U.S. forces have taken action to degrade ISIS Somalia's capability, but there's more that must be done. So, Ambassador, during the last Trump administration, the President withdrew almost all the U.S. troops from Somalia. What would be the consequences of the administration doing that again now?
I think the consequences would be incredibly dangerous. The situation has evolved even from that period of the first Trump administration, and we do have, two different terrorist organizations that wish us harm and have a track record of being able to carry out attacks at some distance. I am sympathetic to the argument that I know my colleague will make that it's very frustrating to have been continuing to try to build Somali capacity to combat these threats themselves year after year after year, only to have these efforts essentially undermined by poor governance in Somalia. But the question is, what is the alternative? Mm-hmm. Being frustrated and sort of washing our hands of it doesn't address these very, very real threats.
Let me ask you this then. Research has shown that violent extremism surges during humanitarian crises, and you talk about not good governance and those things. So how are the Islamic insurgents in Somalia taking advantage of these issues to recruit? And what does the administration's, our cuts to humanitarian aid compound this to what you were just mentioning?
Certainly it does feed right into the messaging about who the enemy is, but it also creates the kind of resource scarcity that leads to desperation, people seizing, who might not really be ideologically aligned, but are looking to survive. And so there's you have to sift through these groups in Somalia. Some of it is survival. Some of it is sort of hardcore believers. Some of it is Somali nationalism. Mm-hmm. But I it's certainly not helping. It's hurting.
Thank you. I want to stay on Africa for a minute because Ambassador Gavin, again, this is a difficult period for everyone residing in East Africa and the Horn. I want to talk about women's role there. We know it's particularly hard for women and for girls. The war in Sudan, extremism in Somalia, the post-conflict reconstruction in Ethiopia. They have left thousands of women survivors of conflict-related sexual violence struggling for justice. Across the region, women continue to battle forced marriages, child labor, lack of social protections, and murder just for being a woman. They struggle to break through economically, politically, and through any social norms to gain equality. So, Ambassador, could you talk about how the U.S. has supported women's and girls' advancements in East Africa and the Horn, and really the importance of doing so, and again, the impact of U.S. terminating these kinds of programs on the region and success of the region? I think women can support of the family. So is it really critical to family structure and stability in some ways, right?
It's, of course, it's essential. And in many African societies, women are a backbone, of course, of what creates peace and stability. And you're right about the really jaw-dropping and appalling level of sexual violence that we're seeing associated with the conflicts in the Horn right now. This happened in Tigray during that crisis. It's happening in the Amhara and Oromo areas right now. And of course, Sudan's plight is heartbreaking. And when the U.S. is not there to try and provide assistance, medical assistance, and support, and critically a voice speaking out about some international norms, I think we all are invested
Violence
in.
against women, right?
Yeah, then we're missing a chance to strengthen these societies that we would like to have as peaceful partners going forward.
Thank you. And I, too, will follow the norm and yield back.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. I don't mean this disrespectfully, but your criticism about pulling troops out of that area, I think it's important for the record to note that when you have troops there, the question always is who are you going to train and who are you going to fight with? And when you have Somalia, Puntland, Somaliland, all of whom have disputed borders and incredibly entangled tribal issues there, who do you stand with? Now, obviously, we fight ISIS there and we fight Houthis there. If you can identify them, okay. But boy, the rest of this stuff, this is really a tough question. So I appreciate the criticism, but there's a lot more to this than just here are the good guys and here are the bad guys. Finding good guys is really, really difficult there. So, but anyway, thank you for your thoughts. With that, we'll turn to Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank both of you for your testimony today. I'm actually going to pick up where Senator Rosen left off with respect to Sudan. We're now in the third year of a brutal civil war in Sudan. When Secretary Rubio was here for his confirmation hearing, he testified that helping resolve that conflict would be a top priority of the administration. Clearly, that has not happened. In fact, the cuts to U.S. humanitarian assistance have made a desperate situation in Sudan even worse. Ambassador Gavin, you wrote a piece for the Council for Foreign Relations, I think back in February, entitled The Abandonment of Sudan. Obviously, we need to look for ways to put pressure on some of the outside parties. I have proposed actually stopping U.S. military assistance to the UAE so long as it continues to support the murderous RSF. And I think I heard you say, Mr. Messervy, that the RSF could not continue its military operations without that outside help from the UAE. But if I could start with you, Ambassador Gavin, what should we do, and should we be using more of our leverage to put pressure on some of the outside parties that are fueling this murderous conflict, including the UAE support for the RSF?
Yes, I absolutely think we should be using more of our leverage with the UAE and having, real conversations. I think Emirati officials are aware that the RSF is never going to govern all of Sudan. they have concerns about what the other side of the coin looks like. And so do we, frankly, or we should. And what we've called the SAF for a long time is a coalition of entities and actors, some of which are highly problematic in terms of U.S. interests. And I don't think that that is likely to hold together in a scenario where there could be a military solution. But the reality is there is no military solution. What needs to happen is a set of talks that involve Sudanese actors, pressure on these external actors who continue to arm and fuel both antagonists, but most importantly, really a greater effort to elevate the civilian voices in Sudan who have never given up. They continue to be, in many parts of the country, the only source of medical care, of food, which is quite scarce. And they have been organizing to try to come up with some clear principles they would like all parties to agree to. That needs to be raised up and given validation and credibility from the U.S.
Thank you. Given the time, I'm going to turn briefly now to Ethiopia and Eritrea. I think we all know that Ethiopia stands at a pretty critical juncture as it grapples with the aftermath of the conflict in Tigray. And as we speak, we see, Eritrea, I think the leader there called up the troops, at least there are reports to that effect. I guess my question for each of you is, if you were in charge right now of U.S. policy, what practical steps would you take today to try to address the bubbling, really almost boiling situation with respect to Ethiopia and Eritrea? Why don't we start with you, Mr. Messervy?
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a few key issues here. One is that the Eritreans are still inside of Ethiopian territory in western Tigray, in violation of the Pretoria Agreement, which is what ended the Tigray War, ostensibly. So there has to be a process for having them leave, but of course their presence is also tied into the internal divisions where the Amhara claim that area, the Tigrayans also claim it. It's a major flashpoint. So I think right now what the U.S. can do, and I believe what it did do along with other partner countries, was to unequivocally demonstrate to both sides that we are watching and that a conflict would be unacceptable. And then it should offer its good offices for either convening discussions or trying to mediate around some of these issues, but they are intensely difficult, and I'm not, frankly, terribly positive about the immediate prospects for resolving them.
Thank you. Pastor Gavin.
I would just quickly agree and add that, mobilizing more of the AU member states to insist on actual implementation of the Pretoria Agreement would be a helpful focal point. This is something everybody's already agreed to, but it has not been fully implemented. It's in this strange limbo. And so I think that getting that kind of regional engagement would be helpful.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Senator Cruz.
Thank you. Mr. Messervy, as we've been discussing, I believe the Chinese Communist Party presents the most significant long-term strategic threat to the United States. I also believe that China is a global threat that has to be confronted globally, including in Africa. We have a vast range of interests in Africa and a complicated security architecture. Our interests there are counterterrorism, trade in critical mineral supply lines, global biosecurity, preventing illegal immigration that threatens allies in other parts of the world, blocking illicit finance of hostile actors, and even, importantly, space development. And across Africa, again and again, the Chinese have exploited local political, economic, and sometimes even cultural conditions to undermine American national security interests. Sometimes they do it by securing bilateral and multilateral agreements that block American goals. Other times they do it by creating instability, but they are actively doing it. Talk a little bit about the specific tactics that China is using in East Africa and the Horn, and what are the specific conditions they are exploiting?
Yeah, thank you, Senator, for the question. China, first of all, has a long-standing strategy for the continent. That's been a topic of this conversation, is the U.S. doesn't have anything comparable. And they are highly disciplined about implementing it. So that's sort of the foundation of what they're doing. As far as specific tactics, they like to engage at a very senior level, the highest possible senior level. They do that in a variety of ways. Some of it is as open as bribery, but a lot of it is helping leaders, for instance, with key infrastructure projects that helps them politically in the domestic space, or just expressing solidarity. That rhetoric is important. But even the diplomatic exchanges, they engage, as I said, at a very high level, but they do it constantly as well. I referenced in my opening remarks over 100 visits from senior Chinese officials to this area. So they engage at a much higher tempo and at a much more senior level than U.S. Diplomats do. So those are some of the specific tactics that they use, but they're not unique to East Africa. They use them across the continent to great effect. And then easy money loans, very important to their strategy, investment, trade agreements. We're seeing more and more free trade agreements where these so-called green lanes, where they're preferential access to the Chinese market for agricultural goods. So it's genuinely a wide array of tactics that are grounded in a long-term strategy.
And how has Chinese involvement impacted the ongoing conflicts in the region?
Yeah, so I think usually China actually prefers stability because that facilitates what they're trying to do in other areas. They generally try to stay out of these types of things. We have seen some sort of, I would argue, weak diplomatic efforts from the Chinese. They do have a special envoy for the region who occasionally goes and talks to the various leaders, but I don't think anything substantive comes of it. And they do contribute to peacekeeping operations, but that's much more, I would argue, about them building both diplomatic heft, but also capabilities for and experience for the troops in these types of austere environments where they're often put. So I think they are not nearly as helpful as they could be. I think where they actively are negative are the Chinese weapons that flow through the area. Back in the original Sudan civil war, they armed the Omar al-Bashir regime, which was genociding Darfuris at the time. They armed both Ethiopia and Eritrea during their border war in the late 1990s. And Chinese weapons continue to flood the area. We're seeing Chinese bombs and other things, probably re-exported from UAE, show up in Sudan.
So many of the agreements China has been locking in are explicitly military agreements. Since 2017, China has operated a military base in Djibouti. The CCP Beijing is actively working to deepen ties across the region to secure greater access to the Red Sea and key maritime routes. Describe the nature of China's specifically military cooperation in the Horn.
Yeah, so you referenced the flagship, which is the Djibouti base, but we have seen a very real uptick in military trainings. So I think it was 2 or 3 years ago the Chinese inaugurated an annual meeting for African defense chiefs. They convene in Beijing. And that has been ongoing, I believe, for 3 years, if I remember correctly. I also referenced in my written testimony the fact that PLA Navy vessels participate in these anti-piracy task forces in the Gulf of Aden. They then will go all around the continent doing port calls, both on the Indian Ocean, but also the Atlantic Ocean side. And that's clearly an effort to build blue water naval capabilities that they covet so they can project power into the South China Sea and probably for an eventual invasion of Taiwan. And again, the weapons, so weapons training, deployments, and I already referenced the peacekeeping operations. I would say those are the primary elements.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. Senator Booker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to start by adding to, I think, some of the sentiments expressed that we have a colossal problem right now by our failing to understand that if you look at all of humanity, the future is in so many ways Africa. We have 1 out of every 4 people on the planet Earth, and by 2050 are going to be on the continent. 1 out of every 3 working age people. The continent is indispensable when it comes to the future strength, opportunities, prosperity, health of Americans. It is stunning to me that we are lacking a vision for engagement with the continent and are making such colossal mistakes. What the Trump administration is doing right now is not only unacceptable, but it is a series of self-inflicted wounds when we cut the kind of programs that have created economic stability and opportunity for American companies, that have gutted public health and our response to public health, because a public health crisis anywhere now is a threat to public health everywhere. We are stopping, especially as we see the Tanzania elections and the Uganda elections and the instabilities there, we're cutting back our resources helping with democratic stability at a time that democracies are under retreat all across the globe, and the democratic freedoms and ideals that we preach are being undermined by forces that don't share our values. We are in a state of crisis right now when it comes to our relations with the continent and other competitors of ours, from Iranians to Russians to Chinese to people that don't always align with us, from the Emiratis and others, are flooding the zone where we are retreating in a stunning way. We are seeing our retreat on public health, on economic empowerment, on national security, and creating a more volatile and dangerous environment where there are forces there that want to see the destruction of America. And there's no place that, to me, that this is more obvious than just this retreat we have, even in where our embassies and consulates that this administration is slating to close. China has embassies in every single country, and we now see a list that consulates and embassies all over the world, but 6 embassies and 2 consulates in Africa, including around the Horn, are being shut down. When I travel through Africa, the power of our presence there, our ability to combat misinformation and propaganda, our ability to create deep partnerships and connection, we are truly pursuing a set of policies that are going to undermine America's safety, security, and economic strength in the future and make us be more targeted by forces from the Red Sea all the way to terrorist attacks here at home based upon the instability and folks who are focusing and targeting and trying to undermine America. And so, I am stunned. I've already been upset in past administrations with our failure to prioritize. But what's happening right now is just utterly stunning, and generations of Americans will pay a price for it unless we find a way, in a bipartisan way, to focus and do more. In my scarce remaining time, I just want to focus in on Sudan. You call it, Ambassador, rightfully, the worst humanitarian crisis on the globe. And if you want to talk about ethnic cleansing, as the administration rolls out the red carpet for some South Africans recently, the horrors of what's going on there, the instability it's causing to South Sudan, to Chad, the threat to the Horn in general, it cannot be overstated. And so if you, in the time that you have before me, can you please help us as a committee understand that the failure of American focus, there was a bipartisan letter we just put forward to get a special envoy. Just the failure of Americans to focus on this is not only contributing to greater humanitarian crises, but creating a level of instability and crisis that advantages forces that we are opposing, like the Chinese and the Russians and more.
I can take a stab at it. You're absolutely right. Russia thrives in environments of chaos where they can cut a deal to do regime security, whether the regime is legitimate or not, and get access to resources. But Sudan's problem is bigger than Sudan. My concern is that we're going to end up with this belt of metastasizing instability all the way across the continent, from the Atlantic to the Red Sea. You have the crisis in the Sahel. Things are not looking great in Central Africa, although I'm hopeful that some advances will bear fruit. And then you have what's happening in the Horn. And as these conflicts spill over, they relate to each other, and it gets harder and harder to disentangle the threads, right? It's hard enough to make peace with 2 or 3 parties. Trying to do it with 16 is a very, very tall order. So I agree with you. I think that, a de facto partition does not mean stability. These are fractious armed entities on either side. And it's, I think important always to remember that Osama bin Laden used to operate from Sudan. The Islamist forces that are a part of that Port Sudan coalition have a long history of wishing America harm.
Mr. Chairman, before I yield, there's a staggering moral failure here in our ability to exercise American influence, greater American influence on this crisis. But what's worse than this is I fear that if we aren't successful in addressing the abject lack of attention, focus, and energy from a diplomatic perspective, that this crisis will grow worse and have implications on our own national security, as our witness indicated. And I'm hoping that we as a committee can take even more actions to try to get the Trump administration to give a higher priority to solving this crisis and showing some true American leadership.
Senator, my partner here and I made the decision to hold this hearing for the reasons you've indicated. There's serious problems here. And as you indicated, or as has been suggested, everything has to be prioritized. And the difficulty is, as always, it's a question of money. Going into debt, $1 trillion every 150 days is unsustainable. So where do you put the money? And there are things here that absolutely cry out for our attention. And the other fact that I think has been underscored here again and again and again is that Africa is such a galloping influence on the planet that it really does need our attention, particularly when it's getting such close attention by people who have values that are very different than ours, other than democracy and respect for human rights. So that's the purpose of the hearing.
Mr. Chairman, the one thing that I would request, and I have a feeling that the Trump administration will listen to you more than me, this does not cost any money to simply nominate ambassadors to key countries in Africa. There's been a scarce lack of even them coming forward with putting up leaders, as we see them filling posts from European nations and others. But in critical areas, we're not even getting ambassadorial nominees.
Fair point. We get that. But again, this comes back to there's only so many hours in a day. And as you know, moving ambassadors through here is without regard to the politics, moving ambassadors through here is a very cumbersome job that the Founding Fathers handed us with the system we go through. But thank you for your thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Shaheen.
I know we're out of time, but I would like to just make 2 points. One is apropos the earlier conversation about PEPFAR and it not being an entitlement. I would like to point out that multiple African countries have, in fact, increased their financing to help pay for PEPFAR and to address HIV/AIDS. And so I would hope that we would continue to help work in partnership with them on that issue. The other thing I would point out with respect to Sudan, one of the things that we know from the data is that when women are at the table in negotiations, that those negotiations are more likely to last longer term and more likely to be successful. It's a mistake we made in Afghanistan when we totally left women out of those negotiations for conflict, and it's the reason why I have been so supportive of the women, peace, and security legislation that we passed, that President Trump signed in his first term, and that now has decided to get rid of because he thinks it's a DEI program. It is not a DEI program. It is a program that recognizes that women make up half of the world, and they need to be part of negotiations and part of ongoing efforts that we make and that we get a benefit from doing that. So I just want to put that on the record, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Shaheen. That'll conclude the hearing. I want to sincerely thank both of you for what I think has been an eye-opening experience for people who really aren't exposed to this, as we all are every day on this committee and in the lane you work in. For information of the members, the record will remain open until close of business tomorrow, May 14th. We ask the witnesses, if they do get such a question, that you respond as promptly as possible, and your response will be included in the record. Also, I'm going to enter in the record the speech that's been referred to regarding Dr. William Rudo, given April 23rd, 2025 in Beijing, China. And with that, and the thanks to the committee, the hearing is now adjourned.
Well, it seems the United States of America is waking up from a deep sleep and trying to catch up with this bus or train that left a long time ago. And the bus is the autonomy of Africa, because in Africa now we are not begging anymore, but we are bargaining. And this is why everybody is trying to have a cake in Africa. Africa is, the target. Africa is the goal. And the United States of America and the West, of course, with their allies, have enjoyed a strongly patronizing and paternalistic kind of relationship that has not been beneficial to Africa, but has helped them exploit, undermine Africa and all black people together. And when Donald Trump came to office for the second time and actually cut ties and most aids to Africa, I think it's one of those moments in time when most African people really realize the truth of this so-called American aid, that they are not just aid but a bait. And that has just exposed a lot. Of course, another thing is, with the awakening, with this new black consciousness around the globe, and the Pan-African spirit, gathering momentum since for some time now, we have really come to learn to challenge the narrative that has been being sold by the West, America, and the allies, a false narrative that has undermined Africa severely. And now, with the system getting upset, America is thrown into chaos. The West is thrown into chaos. Look at how France is behaving with the situation in West Africa, the Sahel. And now, despite them gaslighting Africa to feel like they're not important players, they're back to the boardrooms, discussing for hours on end, burning the midnight oil to discuss about us, and is to strategize on how to catch up a bus that is moving fast and has already left them, caught them asleep and gone. Now, in this video, I want us to tackle it in two ways. So we quickly capture what we were talking about in the previous video, and then we go to the second part, which is the most important for this video. Now, and what I want us to start with why the U.S. elites, the corporates, the think tanks, the military strategists are really concerned about Africa. And we just go about this over this very quickly. So one reason is the geopolitical competition. Talk about China, Russia, Iran, and all the countries they are mentioning right there. China is Africa's largest trading partner right now, deeply embedded through infrastructure projects like Road and Belt Initiative. You have heard them talk about that many times in this video. And Russia is expanding military and mining influence, especially in countries with anti-Western sentiments. Look at what is happening in the Sahel states currently. This alarms Washington as Africa becomes less dependent on the West and more multipolar. Number two, let's talk about our natural resources, the cake, the goal of that everybody is eyeing. So Africa holds vast untapped reserves in oil, in rare earth metals, minerals, uranium, agricultural potential and products. The global tech and green energy transition depends heavily on materials like the cobalt, the lithium, uranium, which are abundant in Africa, in countries like the DRC and Zimbabwe and many other countries in Africa. And then we talk about military and security concerns as a third point. So the US has military bases and operations across Africa in countries like Djibouti, and of course it had been there in the most Sahel states under the so-called Africa. And then there is a fear that loss of influence could lead to instability, terrorism, or even rivals. And this is the point, getting the rivals gaining military footholds in these regions. And let's talk about the fourth one, a very important one, youth and market potential. Africa has the youngest population in the world, of course. And by 2050, as you have heard, 1 in every 4 people on earth will be an African person. A major future market for goods, services, and tech. Western elites see both the challenge and opportunity of engaging with this rising demographic. Let's talk about diplomatic clout. So African nations make up a large voting bloc in the UN, which we are very also critical about, and other international forums. Whoever wins Africa diplomatically often shapes the global narrative on issues like climate, security, and of course, most importantly, economics or trade. So, the hypocrisy at play here. While Western leaders may publicly express the disdain or perpetuate negative stereotypes behind the scenes, they are strategizing intensely, about how to maintain dominance and influence in Africa. This is a two-faced approach that has a historical pattern that this new black consciousness and Pan-Africanism is realizing. One part, dehumanize, undermine black people, black Africa, and the other one is exploit and engage them privately, strategically. But now we're saying no. Let's go to part 2 of how I analyze this video. And part 2 is you are free to choose, but as long as you choose us. So why is the West so obsessed with controlling Africa's friends? What bothers them with Africa forging friendships of their own? Now that is what I'm calling Africa must choose freely, but you need to choose us. So the West fears losing control, of course, and their strategy of exploiting Africa, was based on a one-way traffic. And now Africa is looking to the east, that is to China, to Russia, and they are realizing that even though nobody really has Africa's interest at their heart, more than Africa do have their own interest, but it is a relationship, it has to be a symbiotic relationship. Mutualism has to be there. You have to gain and you have to gain. If I'm not gaining, then I have no business on that table. Now, the key points we want to cover here is the historic pattern of control. From colonial times to the Cold War, Western powers have tried to dictate African alliances, backing coups, puppet leaders, and interfering in elections. This is something we know very, very clearly. Countries like the Congo during the reign of Patrice Lumumba, and then Burkina Faso during the reign of Thomas Sankara were targeted because they sought non-allied or anti-West partnerships. And that is exactly why today this continent bleeds, mourns for losing iconic leaders that would have shaped Africa and the global power structure in Patrice Lumumba and Thomas Sankara. And now look at the games they're playing with Captain Ibrahim Traore, because he is not entertaining their exploitative relationship towards Africa. Now, let's talk about modern day hypocrisy. When African nations turn to China for infrastructure or Russia for arms and security, the West suddenly frames it as a threat to democracy. The same countries that lecture Africa about sovereignty are the first to panic when sovereignty is exercised. Because when I want to befriend China because that I can benefit from China, then that I should be able to exercise my sovereignty and do that. When I want to talk to Russia, then I can go ahead because I'm independent and I am a sovereign state to talk to Russia on my own terms that benefit both of Russia and Africa, Africa and China. But the US panics whenever this is done because they don't believe in the sovereignty of Africa. And their exploitative relationship is going to be exposed because someone is going to be like, oh, so I can get more for the same that I have been offering to the West. Yes, so for example, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the current alliance of Sahel states, when they started to align with Russia, the West called that a dangerous turn, while, these countries are just simply exercising their choice. Now, let's talk about BRICS and the rise of multipolarity. So, BRICS expansion and African interest in joining are freaking out the West. US has actively discouraged Africa from aligning with BRICS or using alternative financial systems like a BRICS currency, because you know that the America weaponizes the dollar. Everybody knows that they weaponize the dollar, so they don't want you to look elsewhere because then you will have rendered them powerless to a really big extent. Yes, that is exactly what is bothering, one of the issues bothering Donald Trump and his allies with South Africa today. See, they are so much worried about South Africa. They are so much over South African issues. Why? Because South Africa is part of the BRICS, and South Africa, being a leader in the continent, is obviously going to influence other African partners, the other African fellow countries, to also look into, the BRICS way or an alternative. And we talk about the double standards in diplomacy as another point. So Western nations have the freedom to trade with dictators like Saudi Arabia, but they criticize African states for similar relationships or for similar trades. If they think so and so is a dictator, but they still do business with those people. When we in Africa want to do the same, with those people that they deem as dictators, why is it that it becomes a problem to them? The West alliances are interest based, yet they expect Africa to allow to follow a value based alignments. It's confusing. It's confusing, but of course, there's a lot of conflict of interest when you look at it here. And then we talk about the role of propaganda and sanctions. So African leaders who lean towards China, Russia, or the East are often demonized in Western media. Sanctions, aid threats, and diplomatic isolations are used as tools to punish these leaders. A perfect real case example, Zimbabwe under the leadership of Mugabe. Zimbabwe has never ever recovered. The sanctions for land reform just for looking east. He used to be a darling of the people. He used to be a darling of Europe and America until he started to seek help from the east, until he started to seek justice for the people of Zimbabwe. And he died a dictator because the West, who control this media, because the media is also a Western tool of control by proxy. They of course smeared his name, sanctioned the country. I mean, they just threw the whole country into chaos for just a leader of that country pursuing justice. Yeah, that is what I had for you today in this really, really educative video. I hope you found this very eye-opening and educative. I hope you also had something to take away, something you have learned. Thank you for sticking along till at the end of this video. Do share what you think, your take in the comment section below. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and please support this channel. And I always say the easiest and free way to do that is by subscribing and being part of this family. You can also send us a super thanks or join our membership, and we will definitely appreciate. So until next time, I'll be happy to see you in my next video. Peace out.